Afternoon, everyone. This is the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. And for the record, this is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. We have my camera off. I got to get that on. I'm not even on. One moment. Technical difficulty. All right. Let me start that again. You always catch me in embarrassing situations there, Bigham. For the record, this is the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. And for the record, this is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. We have three bills on the agenda today. The first and third bill will be layover, and we will be voting on the second bill. The first bill is Senator Nelson's Senate File 3594. So Senator Nelson, why don't you introduce your bill and any testifiers you have?
Oh,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to be in front of your committee today. Member Senate File 3594 deals with our youth and making sure that our youth have access, all of our youth across our state, no matter where they live, to the services that can best help them meet and develop into their full potential. This bill is an appropriation from the Department of Public Safety Office of Justice Programs for grants to address racial disparity of youth using shelter services in Rochester and St. Cloud. This is very similar to a bill that passed this committee last year that went to several youth shelters as well. I'll just briefly state why this is so important, and I'd like to turn it over to our testifiers. As we know, I'll tell you that the two shelters that this grant would support the students. These students are from two areas, the Rochester Southeast region, which covers 20 counties, and that's the Von Wald shelter just outside of Rochester, but 20 counties. This helps students from 20 counties, a bit of a drive. And then the central Minnesota region is about 15 counties, and that is surrounding St. Cloud. That is where that youth shelter is located. And typically, traditional services are hard to provide in multiple counties. And so we've created a mobile crisis management. We might think of it as much as we have with telehealth, for example. Getting the services to where the kids are in this case and doing it in different ways. Instead of making every student, every child come, make that traverse that drive and come to that location. So we want to take the services to where the students are. This bill, as I said, is based on a prior bill, and it's asking for $210,000 evenly split between those remaining two youth service shelters. With that, Mr. Chair, just a brief synopsis of the bill. I would like to turn it over to my testifier, if I might.
Yeah, please go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want the committee to note some of the students who are here today, right here in the front row, which is always the place to be.
Well, welcome to the committee. We've had a long time of not having people in our rooms at all. And now when we have a chance, we've got the youngest citizens here, and we are grateful that you're showing up. Someday you might be sitting in these chairs, and we encourage that. So, your testifier?
Yes. Thank you, Senator Limmer. That is exactly why I'm so excited to see these young people here today. Mr. Chair, Dan Farr is the Executive Director of 180 Degrees. I'd like to turn it over to him.
Sure.
With your blessing.
Mr. Farr, would you introduce yourself for the record and then proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dan Farr, 180 Degrees, the Executive Director. What I'd like to do today is simply just introduce you to the work that we do in the metro area, but more specifically, the work that we do in the rural areas. We know from experience that the funding streams are much more difficult for us to capture in the rural areas of Minnesota. We also know that family crisis, youth experiencing problems in school, in their communities, is happening just as well as in the urban areas. So we're here to make sure that our youth across multiple counties, 35 counties to be exact in rural Minnesota, get the services that they need. And so what I'd like to start out with is our young people here. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about each one and what their dreams are. I prefer to call them scholars. I prefer to call them students. I prefer to call them entrepreneurs. I prefer to call them professionals because that's their dream. Their dream is to grow up like any one of us and have a family, have a job, be part of their community, pay their taxes on time, get their tax rebates on time, do all the things that we do as adults. So Richie here, he wants to play basketball, right? He's got a pretty good mentor next to him who played professional basketball, our program director, Mr. Coffey. And then next to Richie here, we have Nevaeh. Can you raise your hand? Who Chair Senator Limmer, you'll be glad to know, she just got her first job. She starts on Monday. And her job interview was this last Monday. And we've talked about this. We've talked about the importance of where our youth end up in the system. And there's two directions that they can take. They can be a burden on us, but if we do the right things at the right time, with the right timing, it can be a job. Graduate school, get a career, move forward. And then Aspen in the middle, who I know I'm not going to be able to say this correctly, but she has aspirations, right, to do makeup and esthetician. There we go. And it's something that I haven't paid that much attention to in my life, as you can look at me. But that's her dream. They all have dreams. And what this bill does is this allows us to reach youth in all of those counties where we only have one shelter in each of those regions. But we don't want every youth to have to enter shelter. It's sometimes not the best plan. We want to be able to work with youth and families to make sure that our young people are taken care of so that they can become our next scholars, our next students, our next job seekers. And I'm going to leave you with three numbers, three things that I want to share with you today. One is 85% of our youth exit to a safe destination when they're part of our program. Over half of those youth end up going back home. We are about supporting families and rebuilding lives. We know that many of these families suffer with seeking jobs, low wages, chemical health, mental health problems. We want to be there. We want to be there to help the intervention. The other thing that 90% of our youth say when they leave us is that they can trust and identify at least one adult in their life. For me, that was my wrestling coach, Mr. Romehill. Now, I graduated in 1983. Mr. Romehill still lives with me today because of the influence that he had on my life as a trusted adult. Sometimes we are the trusted adults for our young people. Sometimes we have to find others in their communities who can be trusted adults. And then I just want to say that right now we are serving over 250 youth a year between these two shelters. That number with this bill, we project will go up to 400. Not only in our shelters, but 400 youth that we can reach in our regions to become, once again, our young scholars, our students, and our future taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. Senator, do you have anyone else to give testimony?
No, I have no further testifiers,
All
but
right.
some final comments when you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Why don't we ask if the audience has anything to say about this bill, for or against? Now would be your time. If not, Senator, why don't you make final comments, and then we'll break it open for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank Senator Ingebrigtsen for being a co-sponsor. This is a great bipartisan bill. We also have Senator Putnam on as sponsoring this bill. And I would just add a couple things. One, you heard about the importance of having a trusted adult in their life. And I will just put on my education hat for a minute and just tell you, resiliency studies have shown for years that kids who are resilient through perhaps some difficult situations, there's one distinguishing characteristic between kids who are resilient and move to thrive, and kids who might continue to have some problems. And it's about one adult. Puts a lot of pressure on us all, but it's having one trusted adult in their corner. And I believe 180 helps with that. And I would just add that these kids, scholars, students, senators, I do believe that it's important that every student have the opportunity, every youth have the opportunity to actually grow and develop into that strong leader that we know they are. And having 180 can certainly help with that. So, Mr. Chair, I would just open it up, as you would say, for questions or comments, but I so appreciate your consideration. This is a very important, a small amount of money making a big difference, not in everyone's future, quite frankly.
Thank you. Senator Ingebrigtsen wanted to start out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this forward. Thank you for you guys that showed up today. But I do want to know what that occupation you talked about. What was the one that you don't know anything about?
Esthetician.
So,
Okay, what is an esthetician?
so,
It's like skincare.
Skincare?
Senator Nelson.
So, Mr. Chair, actually, the esthetician cosmetology license is right next to the eyelash technician licensure. I just want
Senator
to
Limmer.
make sure Senator Ingebrigtsen is
Senator
well
Limmer, I
aware of
object.
that.
No, that's in order. Senator
Senator Limmer, that's exactly where I was going with this, believe it or not, being that was one of my signature legislation pieces that I passed, and that's eyelash extensions, by the way. My legacy, my legacy bill. And now I know Senator Champion has one this year dealing with hair design and hair color, whatever it is he's dealing with. So I was just quite interested in that, but thank you for bringing it forward. It's a great, great bill.
I'm sure we'll always remember you.
I'm sure you will.
Senator Ingebrigtsen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Senate File 3594 will be laid over. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for
Thank you.
traveling here today.
Thank you.
Senator Howe will be up next. This will be a bill that we will be voting on. And the intention, if passed, would be to send it to the Finance Committee. This is House File 2746. When ready, Senator Howe?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Howe from Rockville, Minnesota. I will tell you that last year, we passed the Hometown Heroes Assistance Program. It was enacted in August of last year, and it has already been making a huge impact in our firefighters. The bill in front of you today is a cleanup to fix some of the things that were missed in the original bill. And I'll just quickly run through. There's 4 items it really does. In Section 1, Subdivision 1, it defines what critical illnesses are. Subdivision 2 clarifies which firefighters with critical illnesses are eligible for payments. Subdivision 3 clarifies that a firefighter is eligible for financial payments if they're diagnosed on or after August 1, 2021, when the bill was enacted. And Section 2 transfers the responsibility for issuing the grants to the Minnesota Firefighter Initiative for the Hometown Heroes Assistance Program from the Department of Public Safety's Office of Justice Programs to their office of the State Fire Marshal's Office. And that's the bill in a nutshell, and I'll go to testifiers now, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Howe. Your first witness or testifier, is it George Espenson?
I think Mr. Ebsenson's here just to answer questions, if there
Oh,
are some.
Mr. Wayne Kiewicz.
Correct.
All right, sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members, my name is Wayne Kiewicz. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Firefighter Initiative, more commonly known as Mnfire. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. First and foremost, I would like to thank each of you for your support last year in the passage of the Hometown Heroes Assistance Program. I would especially like to thank our lead authors, Senator Howe and Senator Zwadinski. I'm happy to report that all components of the program are up, running, and assisting Minnesota firefighters across the state. I would like to take some time to give members an overview on why the Hometown Heroes Assistance Program is so consequential for the Minnesota Fire Service. As we're all aware, firefighting is a dangerous job. Over the past few years, it has become evident that firefighters are exposed to a number of hidden dangers that result in increased rates of cardiac issues, cancer, and emotional trauma. For example, according to the National Fire Protection Association, 68% of firefighters will experience some form of cancer in their lifetime. There is a moral imperative to firefighting. The public expects firefighters to put themselves in harm's way to save life and property. However, there is no reason that we can't do everything possible to mitigate and minimize the risks of firefighting. Minnesota has approximately 20,000 firefighters, 90% of whom are part-time or volunteers. These individuals expose themselves to the risks of firefighting for little or no compensation. Additionally, they do not receive any health benefits from their departments. The Hometown Heroes program was designed to address these issues. Training is being conducted statewide in all areas of firefighter health and well-being, giving our firefighters the knowledge and skills to help minimize the health risks that are inherent in firefighting. The Mnfire Assistance Program, or MAP, which is the statewide equivalent of an employee assistance program, is fielding calls from firefighters and their families across the state, assisting them when they ask for help. The Critical Illness Insurance Program, an insurance policy regulated by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, is processing claims from across the state, with the majority of the claims at this time coming from greater Minnesota. The first claim was paid to the family of a firefighter from a small rural town, Marietta, on the western border of Minnesota, who lost his battle with cancer. The Hometown Heroes program is making a difference statewide, and that is due to your support. Thank you. I would like to thank Chair Limmer for hearing our technical correction bill today. I'm here to ask for your support for Senate File 2634, which is a straightforward corrections bill to the original Hometown Heroes statute. I'm not going to repeat what Senator Howe said, but it basically moves the oversight from the Office of Justice Programs to the Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education within the State Fire Marshal's Office. Mnfire has had a long, positive, and successful relationship with the Fire Marshal's Office. All parties affected by this move have been consulted. Each agreed to support the move, and the parties supporting the move are Office of Justice Programs, Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education, State Fire Marshal's Office, Department of Public Safety, and the Department of Commerce. Once again, thank you for your support of the Minnesota Fire Service and firefighter health.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak for or against this bill? Hearing none, we'll move to committee discussion. Anyone? Senator Latz? Yes, Senator Pappas? To follow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members. First of all, I'm proud to have one of my reps, Representative Joachim,
Sorry, guys.
was the chief author of this bill in the House and the other body when it was first passed, and has carried a very important load in getting it implemented, and also, I think, has this bill in the House this year. And it's a great program, I'm glad to support it, but I have a couple questions about the bill itself, if you don't mind. One is, it looks like there's a bit of an expansion of what illnesses are covered from the original language in statute, which covered heart disease and cancer. And now with the definition of critical illness, it also covers other illnesses that are covered by a policy of insurance issued under 60A. Can you maybe give me an example or explain how that expansion applies?
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, I think I'll let Mr. George Epsonson, I could talk to it, but I think I'll let him. He's got it more polished than I have.
Mr. Espenson, would you identify yourself for the record and then proceed with your answer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Latz. My name is George Espenson. I'm the president of Mnfire. It's a voluntary position for me. Yes, so what this bill language does, while it might look like an expansion, it's actually bringing the bill into conformity with what you can purchase out in the private sector for insurance. You can't, it's hard to get a critical illness policy that only covers cancer and cardiac. And the policy that we've purchased does focus on those two issues, but like all critical illness policies, it includes other things. And that's what's out there on the market. And so we wanted to include that definition to make sure that we're in compliance with the legislation.
Yeah, I think there's these, thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of these benefits that we're talking about are purchased, they're covered by an insurance policy that Mnfire buys. So they're not paying this money out. These are proceeds paid out through the insurance program that they buy. So they buy an insurance policy, and they couldn't buy, if you go to the insurance company, they have what they consider critical illnesses, and that changes over time. So for the same money, you get a lot of other things covered, and that's why we had to expand it. Otherwise, we would be in trouble with the Department of Commerce, and so that's where we went to.
Okay, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Latz?
It's probably simply my ignorance about how exactly this program works. But is this a private insurance program? I thought this was a separate fund that makes payments when critical illnesses are diagnosed. Am I not understanding that correctly?
Mr. Espenson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, so in order to protect and make sure that we don't run out of money, the strategy always was that Mnfire would be getting this money, and then we would go out on the private sector and buy an insurance policy to cover all 20,000 firefighters in Minnesota, and in that way, there's not a chance that we run out of funds to pay claims with. So the insurance company is assuming the risk, and we have a 5-year rate guarantee from the provider.
Okay, that helps. So the money that is appropriated or goes into this Minnesota Firefighter initiative is used to pay premiums for that insurance policy.
Mr. Chair and Senator
Mr.
Latz, that's
Espenson.
correct.
Okay.
Senator Latz?
And then, do you have maybe an example of some of the other critical illnesses that might come up beyond cardiac and cancer?
Mr. Espenson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, yes. So for instance, as COVID began to emerge as an issue, especially in the first responder arena, Securian added that benefit at no charge. So we've paid out benefits to firefighters that have been hospitalized with COVID for more than 5 days. It also covers those other sort of classic critical illness issues. If you think Aflac, is kind of one of the market leaders there. So loss of an eye, loss of hearing, loss of a hand or an arm, those kinds of things. But the claims that we've been paying out to the fire service have been predominantly cancer, cardiac, and then several on COVID.
And, Mr. Chairman, are those, is there any necessary nexus between the work as a firefighter and those critical illnesses that's necessary? Or is that by statute deemed to be connected?
Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz. So those are kind of, those other less common, payouts are part of critical illness policies. Yes, firefighters do, lose limbs, et cetera, in the course of their duties, but the focus for us is the cancer and cardiac piece. It's just that you can't go out in the market and buy an approved policy that doesn't include some of those other things. But the payouts predominantly are cancer, cardiac, and then also lately COVID.
And so, Mr. Chairman, so then if a firefighter has a heart attack, and do they have to prove that it was service-connected in order to qualify for the insurance payment? Or is it by virtue of the fact that it was a firefighter who had the heart attack, the insurance policy is there to cover that regardless of whether it occurred while responding to a call, for example, or anything like that?
Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, it's the latter. It's presumed to be, all those things are covered whether they get it right on the job or not. But in Minnesota, it's presumed that if you have a cardiac or a cancer issue, that it stemmed from your service as a firefighter.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Sir Left.
that was my memory of why we did this in the first place, is because there had been disputes on occasion over whether or not a heart attack that occurred when a firefighter was back at home 2 hours after a call or whatever, or if they developed heart disease along the way because of the inherent stress in that particular kind of a job. And we didn't want to have battles anymore over whether it was service-connected and would qualify for payment. Loss of an eye, on the other hand, or falling off a ladder while cleaning the gutter, I'm not sure if that would end up being considered a critical event or critical illness that would qualify for insurance coverage. Is not necessarily as closely connected to service. It may not be connected at all to work as a firefighter. And so I'm wondering whether the policy that you purchased through Securian, for example, makes any distinctions there? Or is it in the nature of kind of just a benefit that's provided for employment, and if you suffer one of these critical illnesses, doesn't matter if it happened in any way connected to your service as a firefighter or on the job as a firefighter? Just the fact that you are a firefighter qualifies you for the payment. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, that is correct. It's covering firefighters for all those instances on the job or away from the job. That's correct. So it's a benefit that they're getting. But I can tell you that all of our claims thus far have been for, things related to their profession.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe.
Thank you. And if you know anything about the fire service right now, we are struggling to not only hire, but also to retain our firefighters, especially out in the volunteer realm. So this covers those, and it's an added benefit, and it is a recruitment tool and a retainment tool.
And then, if I may, just one other question, Mr. Chairman. The change in the payment language from one-time payment to support payments of up to $20,000, I assume that was made because there are occasions when it's doled out in multiple payments rather than in a one-time payment, and you wanted to have the flexibility to be able to do that? Is that why that language is there? Or maybe you can explain why that change is made. It's made in a couple of places in the bill.
Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, so that's just clarifying that if you had a cancer diagnosis and received a payout, and then your cancer goes into remission, and 3 years later you have another cancer diagnosis, that you can receive another benefit. Or if you had a cancer diagnosis and then some period of time later you suffer a cardiac event. So the policy isn't limited just to one payment to one firefighter one time. and it brings us in compliance with the policy. Because again, that's the way critical illness policies work.
So, Mr.
Fair
Chairman,
enough.
so then if there's a cancer diagnosis and it goes into remission and then it comes out of remission 3 years later, would that be considered one diagnosis or one critical illness? Or would that be considered two and make them eligible for another payment of up to $20,000?
Mr. Espenson.
Yes, so Mr. Chair and Senator Latz, yes, theoretically, that would make them eligible for that second payment. That's correct. Just for clarification, however, typically a cardiac or a cancer diagnosis results in the loss of your ability to be a firefighter anymore. So typically, those are one payout, and then your career is ended.
I see. And that's the way the policy is written.
Senator Ladd.
So this just comes into compliance with the policy terms.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very
Senator
much.
Howe.
No, that's just what I was gonna bring up, Mr. Chair, is it's language to comply with that, policy, and the insurance company's gonna make that determination. It won't be Mnfire.
All right. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is kind of an interesting way to do this, and I really do understand that you buy a package. You can't just get cardiac and cancer. And so in order to cover it, you get this package, and with that comes extra things as well. That just is nice, glad to hear that. My question is this type of an insurance on top of, because I know firefighters also many times for their jobs or a variety of things have regular insurance that I would expect would cover things like cancer or heart disease. So is this on top of that, or I'm not quite sure how that works with regular insurance?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Howe.
I think there's a difference between health insurance and that piece that maybe the full-time firefighters have and what they would carry on themselves. This is more an additional coverage that you'd pick up and cover. And this just, they don't carry it themselves. It's just as long as they're in the fire service, they're covered. And they don't have to pay for it. It's there. And so it's an additional coverage over and above or alongside their health insurance.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're getting some updates here. Are there any financial changes, or was that a fully appropriated or appropriated already? So this is policy, technical updates?
Senator Howe.
This is, Mr. Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer, this is just, these are just updates. I don't think there's no additional appropriations. That money has been appropriated. We've purchased the insurance program already. So these are just updates and clarifications and technical changes to clarify who's eligible, when they're eligible, and how and clarifying how the program's supposed to work.
Mr. Chair, one
Chair
last
Kiffmeyer.
time. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm kind of interested, though. How do they find out about it? Do they have to apply for it? If I could just get a sense of the process, so when I go back home to my firefighter folks, I can be more informed, because that's going to be their question. How do you get into this, get this
Mr.
benefit?
Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer, well, first of all, thank you for your line of questioning, and double thanks for bringing it back home and letting your local fire department know about it. So we've done numerous email blasts and also physical mailings to every fire department in Minnesota. In fact, early on to kick off this program, we sent out a mailing to every fire department in the state with brochures, a quantity enough for every firefighter in that department, so that they all should have gotten handed the brochure that explains these benefits and the other Hometown Heroes Assistance Program benefits. So everybody should have those. They have a card to call our toll-free number 24/7 to be connected with service agents to help them. It's on our website, and again, they have a brochure which lays out the program details, all the covered items, and how they apply for benefits.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is kind of intriguing that you have an insurance policy, because we're used to seeing something where you have this cash account, and then they apply for this money, and it's quite extensive. So when you have something like this, that's an insurance policy, other than once you know how, or you apply, or whatever that process is, then after that, does the insurance company take care of paperwork and following up with them? What happens after they do apply? What's kind of that process?
Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer, that's exactly right. So in order to keep Mnfire's administrative costs as low as possible and have a very, low cost of doing business, we've delegated all that stuff over to Securian, and it's a very simple claims process. And then from that point on, Securian handles all the paperwork, the payout, the tax information, all those kinds of things, so that Mnfire doesn't have to develop a staff and have an office and, create a bunch of overhead. We're all private sector people here, and we want to deliver as much of that appropriation right to the benefit of the firefighters and their families, because this has been an issue in Minnesota for quite some time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That really was very, very interesting, and I'm glad we had an opportunity to hear this bill, and thank you, Senator Howe, for bringing it forward, because I think this kind of a process seems too like it's simpler for the firefighters. For them, it's something like an insurance policy where they can be a little more familiar with. It takes, like you said, the burden off of you to set all of that up, but it's just kind of a different way of doing things. I think Senator Latz found the same thing was intriguing. It's not quite, I think it's even better. I think it has some, it covers a few more things and doesn't have all that other kinds of set up an office and handle and go through it. Let those who are familiar with claims processing do it. So thank you very much. Appreciate the information. Thank you.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an uncle who's a past firefighter. He's part of the Alumni Association, I guess, if you want to call it Alumni Association. They're past firefighters. He was the fire chief for East Bethel Fire Department, but he's up in his 80s right now. I don't know if this applies to somebody it's only recent, I guess, that's happened to, but he's suffering from emphysema from the being in the fire department, but he's managing. I just wanted to see if there was any other correlation to other past firefighters involved.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Anderson. No, I don't get any benefit from this either, because I resemble that. I don't have I don't have all the issues, but I'm a former fire chief and retired firefighter, and that's why that's one of the changes we had to make here, is to clarify that you have to be diagnosed on or after, and I would, you have to be a active firefighter in order to qualify. So that's the provisions that we had to put in, because I don't know what the cost of that policy would have been if we would have covered that many more folks that had touched a piece of turnout gear in the last 50 years that we kind of up there. So we limited it to just those folks that are in the active fire service, and then it goes from the date of inaction at August 1 of 2021. And we had to clarify some of those things because we realized we weren't clear enough in the beginning.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
So in your opening testimony, Senator Howe, you mentioned that even since this bill being put in place back in August of 2021, you said that you've had some positive stories to tell regarding this, and I'd just like to hear
What the hell was that
open for your story.
for? Mr. Espenson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Anderson, first of all, thank you for your comments, and thanks to your father for his service to the cities of, to East Bethel. So yes, we have had a number of claims that have been processed under this critical illness policy, which has been the focus of this discussion. I think it's a dozen or so, and that have been paid. so far, and we have about 26 total that are in process, so working through those. You know, they're good stories in the fact that people were able to easily navigate the process and get the pay. Of course, it's not a great story when you've had an affliction of cancer or cardiac, and sadly, our first payout to a firefighter in Little Marietta, Minnesota, which is on the South Dakota border, he passed away not too long after receiving his cancer payout. He lost his battle with cancer. For the Mnfire Assistance Program, the MAP program, we're getting 30 or more calls and doing mental health outreach to those people on a regular basis. And then lots of peer support. And then our ongoing free training to the fire service has trained thousands of firefighters, and we continue to get people signing up for that every single week. So the program's out and it's rolling. And of course, it's early stages still, so we still need to get that awareness out. So again, thank you to Senator Kiffmeyer for circling back to your firefighters. That'll be great just to reinforce the importance of the program, but many, many good stories.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a question. Since this involves an insurance company, any payout that would, I'm assuming, is not taxable? It would be for the direct
Correct,
cost.
correct.
All right. Good.
We don't know the tax.
Mr. Espenson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so there are many different things in the tax code that would affect that, and so that's really up to the firefighter and their tax, preparer. There are instances where where it definitely can be viewed as a taxable event, and we make that very clear in all their paperwork that they receive about how that money should be treated. But they don't have to produce receipts for it. They get the money and then they use it to offset their costs.
I see. Okay. Any further discussion? Senator Bigham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Howe and testifiers, for your advocacy on this very important issue. And as the daughter and sister of firefighters, I proudly move that House File 2746 be recommended to pass and sent to general orders.
Sent to Finance.
Finance, sorry, I tried to help you, Senator Howe. Sent to Finance.
It's just like the Judiciary Committee, no one escapes. Thank you, Senator Bigham. Senator Bigham moves House File 2746 be recommended to pass and be sent to the Finance Committee. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion prevails. Thank you, Senator Howe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to Senate File 3329. Senate File 3329, chief author is Senator Johnson. However, he's tied up with another bill presentation in another part of the complex. And so co-author Senator Bigham will present Senate File 3329.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And this bill will be laid over.
It'll be laid over, so it doesn't do me any good to pull up my chief author bills and start offering them as amendments while I have. Okay. Mr. Chair, first, I do have the A3 amendment, which is an author's amendment.
That's being passed out now, Senator Bigham. And this is this is first jurisdiction.
Correct.
So this is considered an author's amendment. Everyone have the A3 amendment? Being an author's amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Senator Bigham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Senate File 3329, which is Senator Johnson's bill, and I appreciate being a co-author on it because I think it's very important policy for us in talking with law enforcement. It's a tool in the toolbox, a necessary one for them to get at stopping motor vehicle thefts. So what this does is allows the use of a mobile tracking device on a stolen vehicle when the owner has given consent, the car has been reported stolen to law enforcement, and that the officer has to remove the tracking device within 24 hours now with the amendment that was adopted. And then the evidence collected after the motor vehicle was returned on that tracking device is inadmissible. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my testifier from the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office.
All right. Sir, would you identify yourself for the record and then proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Mike Martin. I'm an undersheriff with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, and I've been a licensed peace officer for 30 years in the state of Minnesota. Over the last approximately year and a half, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of carjackings and auto thefts across the state, but particularly in the metro area. If you go back even 5 years, carjackings were extremely rare, and therefore they were handled very seriously. But you might get a handful of carjackings a year. Last year in Minneapolis alone, they had 603 carjackings. St. Paul had 101, and there were roughly another 100 throughout the metro area. A lot of times these cars, not only that are carjacked but stolen, are then used in additional crimes. And when the officers try to stop them, the vehicles the vehicles flee, and the officers are put in a position of either terminating a pursuit and not pursuing the vehicle, or the position of pursuing the vehicle and risking a dangerous high-speed pursuit. GPS technologies have increased greatly over the last decade, and now there's the ability to use in-car GPS. So many manufacturers have their own GPS that they install in the cars. There are also services like OnStar and other services that allow for tracking if a vehicle's stolen by the owners. And a lot of devices now have GPS enabled on them, so that if a vehicle's stolen with a phone in it, with a laptop in it, with even Apple earbuds, there's the ability to track those through GPS. We also have now available technologies that we can deploy. So if we can get close enough to a vehicle, we can deploy GPS devices that will stick to the vehicle. It allows us then to back off and then follow the vehicle without having to pursue it or risk any kind of dangerous behavior. One of the issues is obviously our current statute requires us to get a search warrant if we're gonna place GPS on a vehicle. This legislation would allow us to forego that when a vehicle has been reported stolen, and to be able to track that vehicle until the time when we recover it. The amendment gives us 24 hours to do that before we seek a search warrant. That is something that we agree with. We think that that's very reasonable. Sometimes it's easy to contact the registered owners. Other times we have a difficulty, and if we see a stolen vehicle, we don't have time to slow down, check to see if, with the registered owner, if it's okay. So this would allow us just to track the vehicle until it's recovered, and then remove the device. And I would ask for your support, because this is one of the best ways we can reduce high-speed chases and still hold offenders accountable and recover the vehicles. And obviously, the disproportionate impact of these cases are on the people who can least afford it. And we want to try to mitigate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Under Sheriff Martin. Next testifier is Julia Decker. Ms. Decker, come on up to the table.
Hi there.
And would you identify yourself for the record and then begin your testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julia Decker, Policy Director for the ACLU of Minnesota. We're providing brief testimony on Senate File 3329. ACLU of Minnesota did have initial concerns with the bill as introduced because it did present a risk of extended warrantless surveillance after an exigent circumstance no longer existed. At the same time, we understood that the stated rationale is to avoid these high-speed chases that could arise out of those exigent circumstances. We appreciate the amendment to add a time limit to the warrantless tracking that this bill otherwise permitted. As many of you know, the ACLU of Minnesota continues to be broadly concerned about the rapid development and deployment of technology that can increase secret warrantless surveillance. This deployment often outstrips existing laws, which can have impacts and implications for the civil liberties of all Minnesotans. So we would just urge this committee and the legislature to assess bills for these impacts and implications, and to remember that just because technology can infringe on civil liberties in ways that previous cases did not envision does not mean that it should. Thank you.
Thank you. The next testifier is Mr. Rich Newmeister. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Newmeister. Would you identify yourself for the record and then proceed?
Chair Limmer, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Rich Newmeister. It's ironic, revisiting a statute that 34 years ago I was involved in working with your predecessors, mainly on the Senate side, dealing with wiretaps, tracking devices, bird dogs as they called them then. And here we are. This is the first time, other than in 2020, where we're revisiting that statute again. And it's important to keep in mind, as I think the former ACLU person, technology has changed, but our laws have not been kept up. And this is part of my testimony. Chair Limmer, members of the committee, there are 4 ingredients in this bill that when we stir the pot. One is technology. Secondly is law enforcement use of that technology, which then pushes the boundaries, the third point, of privacy protections and Fourth Amendment issues. And then the fourth is accountability and transparency of those items. In your packet, you have the statute 626A 35 through 39, which again was adopted more than 3 decades ago, which I will be referring to in my testimony in the 3 flaws that I see how the bill is going forward. It's also important to note that in general, case law, which has not kept up with that statutory language, you must, in general, if you want to put a tracking device on a vehicle or on an object, you need probable cause, you need a search warrant, particularly with mobile tracking devices, with some of the court decisions that have happened over the last 12 years. Now to the first point that I raise in my testimony. If you look at the Senate file, you'll see on pages, lines 110 through 112, a point made, or the owner of the motor vehicle has reported to law enforcement that a vehicle is stolen. So think of the situation where a parked car, a parked snowmobile just on the street, on private property near your house, under the curtilage of your home. And there's a check being done by a law enforcement official. Computer check, or maybe with our technology of license plate readers, a ding that says, according to the database, the car has been reported stolen by an owner. Do we then put a tracking device on a vehicle for up to 24 hours? To me, that's questionable public policy and pushes the boundaries because of the duration issue that has been discussed, and where you now have a centennial eye, electronic eye, on a vehicle up for 24 hours, looking at future crime. And in court decisions, that has been an issue. So the issue then comes into play, what do you do? As part of this constant discussion in the other body and here, you hear a fleeing vehicle, exigent circumstances. We don't want evidence destroyed. We don't want those kinds of things to happen. We want to preserve Blythe, which I agree with. But that's not what the statute says, or the proposal. What it says, the owner of a motor vehicle has reported to law enforcement that the vehicle is stolen. I think that is a less standard and is up for mischief. So, Mr. Chairman, that if you look at the point one that I said on my statement, I would like to suggest, take that language out and just put exigent circumstance or exigent circumstance. The reason why, if you look on your packet, if you look at 626A 35, and then you look at subdivision 2, you'll see that 34 years ago, the legislature put in that said, hey, you're only going to be able to use a warrant or a court order at that time, as it was called, to put something on a vehicle or on an object. And then if you did it, because this law applies other than just law enforcement, but in general, you're going to get a penalty. And that penalty is here. The reason why the bill is here in the first place, so people that, as law enforcement talks about the deployment, that they don't get a fine. But see, I contend that you would be covered under exigent circumstances. It's important to also note that under Sheriff Martin talked about OnStar, those kinds of things. Those are regulated by another part of statute, 626A 42, dealing with location devices and all that, that we, when I say we, I mean the public and the legislature, we put in law 6-7 years ago. So I think that's my recommendation for point one. Point two is and I want to, I'll get to point two last, but I want to deal with point three. Now, with the amendment, a search warrant is being given after 24 hours. And so if you look at the scheme of our current law, again, 626A 3537, and if you go to 626A 37, subdivision 4, you'll see a search warrant. If you go under the scheme, which is now a court order in language, but with the search warrant being added, the current scheme is that it is sealed forever unless the court decides. So we have now a search warrant, not just on this kind of situations, but in general. It has been for 34 years that pen register, mobile tracking devices, and trap and trace device court orders have never been public. Secondly, individuals have never been notified to that. And if you then look onto the next page, on 626A.3A1, you'll see that there was supposed to be some notice. Well, if you take a look at exception or subdivision 2, and this is what's been happening, on ex parte showing of good cause, a judge may postpone or dispense with the service of the inventory required by this section. In other words, the individual, whether or not they ever know, or maybe if criminal prosecution happens, if it doesn't happen, they may never know that they've been tracked in general. So, and Mr. Chairman, I just share with you, and that some folks may have some familiarity with this, is 620, I apologize. It's the part of law where it says that not bearing 626A42, which deals with electronic tracking warrants, they shall be public, they shall be, individuals should be notified. One of the things, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Lass may remember this, is when we were discussing about the Stingray. This was a device that was tracking people on their cell phones. And we, the public and policymakers, never knew about it. So what happened And they were using this statute, 626A, 35 through 39. So what happened is that there was a lot of discussion, and it was also part of policy that people be notified, because there were thousands of people who were being followed by the Stingray and the technology. And also, the tracking warrants were not public. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, they were never made public, and until 2020, when you came with language, and this is where you'll see the language here in 626A, 35 through 39, where that exception is made. And that's one of the only exceptions over the last 35 years. I think it's important that if this bill passes, that you address the issue that mobile tracking device search warrants be public eventually. They can be sealed, but they be public, and the individual subject be told about it, rather than continue the secrecy that has happened over the last 34 years, using this particular track of law. The third point, and this leads into the second point that I raised. This law has not been updated. So we, the public, you, the policymakers, and a great number of people who look at this as part of law to sort of say, hey, let's do this or do that, are aware that it's probable cause, a search warrant is needed. And if you take a look at the other documentation that I gave to you, is the libel case, which is a 2016 Court of Appeals case. It mentions about the importance of having this in statute for people know and up to date, so people know what the law is, because that was part of the discussion. And it also said that a probable cause search warrant based on other court cases are important. So in summary, Chair Limmer and members of the committee, I am recommending that exigent be used as a standard rather than that language I pointed out. Two, that with this being laid over, that there be some language adopted so that if it's going to remain under this track, where search warrants are now going to be given, again, not just in the case described in the new amendment, but in other situations, that those follow how search warrants generally are. Something becomes public, it can be sealed, eventually it becomes public and people know about it, particularly the subjects, and that there be an update of the law. Now, the question will come, is there privacy rights with stolen cars? I will contend that's questionable. But we come with policy on a public street, but it's very clear in the other case that I shared with you, the Collins case, which was from 2018 of the Supreme Court, which was based on a stolen vehicle, a stolen motorcycle, that the curtilage and the protection of the home gives a Fourth Amendment protection. Whether exigent circumstances will allow for a beeper to be placed on, I don't know. But I know dang well that if the car's just sitting there and it's not gonna go, and you come on that property and you put a beeper on it, I think that would violate, according to that, at least that opinion. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope I've been clear, I've provided some information, and I'm willing to entertain any questions.
Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not my bill, so I'm not going to speak for the chief author, but I will say this. We're laying the bill over. There's plenty of time for Senator Johnson to work with folks. I will say that in the example where there's a car parked on a street, most law enforcement agencies have a policy of waiting 24 hours or whatever before they tow or they start doing that. They check on it. They have their CSO, drive around. And now with this, you would have a warrant after 24 hours. So I also think law enforcement has a lot more to do than, looking at a car or snowmobile that's been on a public street for a day and thinking if it's not part of something already, they would have a plan. So I'm not worried about that circumstance, but with that being said, I know this is being laid over, and I'm very confident in Senator Johnson's ability to address any issues that are coming up. And I would be remiss to say, to give a hearty thank you to Sheriff Bob Fletcher, who I know did his due diligence of calling members, you know, in anticipation of session on some of these issues, and appreciate him and his office's work, the sheriff's office, in trying to address these issues.
Thank you. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Bigham, Senator Johnson. I've brought this up to Senator Johnson before, so this is not a surprise, but this is not a bill that I'm all that crazy about. I've got some reservations on, I think we can all agree that, yes, we all want law enforcement to do their job well and be equipped with it. And yes, we want our roads to stay safe, and we don't want high-speed chases that end in more damage. We're all 100% unified on those deals, but I go back to, I think, the point that Ms. Decker from the ACLU made, that just because you can with technology doesn't mean you should. And I'm just not sure where we go on this line. I think maybe for this area, if I knew that it was gonna be guaranteed to stay at this area, that'd be one thing. But maybe I'd ask Ms. Decker to come to the table for a quick question. I am curious about what made the ACLU move position on this bill, because you indicated there were some strong reservations at first. And to use the slippery slope argument, do you have concerns about where this may go in the future? If 20, 40 years from now, there will be all new people here as policymakers on this side of the table, new people out there, you know, Mr. Sheriff and other members of law enforcement that are doing the work on that side of the table. And I think we're just that one more step closer to harming privacy rights in a way where I think once we breach that barrier, we're never going back. And that's kind of my real concern. Maybe not so much this specific issue, but are we taking one more step in a direction where once we breach that, we're not going back? So I'd kind of like your perspective as to what made the organization change and what you may think goes forward from this.
Ms. Decker.
Mr. Chair and Senator Matthews, thank you for that question, and it's a really good one. The ACLU, sort of the national organization, when these devices were first sort of coming up, it was a number of years ago, sort of took the stance that we are taking now, which is that we understand that there might be a Fourth Amendment exigent circumstance exception, but that doesn't last forever, and that at some point there needs to be a warrant to justify the ongoing surveillance of a person. To the broader point, this is a very ongoing concern for the ACLU, is that, as I said in my testimony, technology is developing far more rapidly than any of our institutions can keep up and any of our laws and regulations can keep up. And the reality is that by the time these technologies are deployed in, whether it's fields like law enforcement or education, they are deployed beyond our laws that are in existence, and it's impossible to pull them back. So I agree, it is very troublesome when technologies are deployed without adequate safeguards, and then we come in and try to pull them back. And unfortunately, that is the position that the legislature is constantly in. The chair knows this. We have gone through this with things such as unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, automated license plate readers, things like that. I think we would urge this committee and the legislature to try and get ahead of these technologies and creating some sort of oversight mechanism to approve of the use and deployment of technologies before they are sent out into the world to be used. Because right now, anytime that we get in a situation like this, it is virtually impossible to pull these technologies back. And so that is a real concern for us, and we do hear that concern and are, really would look for something to get ahead of that as opposed to trying to catch up with it.
Thank you. And a brief follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you. I'll just throw out one more question. I don't know if the authors may want to respond or not, or I don't necessarily need an answer, but it makes me think, is there a problem with the current standard today of getting a search warrant first? And I guess I might just leave it at that. If we really need to take this extra step of doing the tracking and doing the search warrant later, is there a problem with the current system of the search warrant first?
Sarah Bigham.
Mr. Chair, otherwise, if the chief author has something to say first, I can fill in if he isn't. If
Senator
we're not,
Johnson.
if we're not
Thank-
thinking the same line here, I can fill in.
First of all, Mr. Chair, thank you for filling in. We were talking about whether air-filled tires or non-air-filled tires were better for trails for the last half an hour. So I apologize my tardiness here. But thank you so much for taking over. I appreciate that.
Goes into detail.
So for me, so when I look at this bill, this was first given an opportunity to take a peek at this, I was generally skeptical of it initially at first. But if you look at Chapter 626A, and you look at that, our state has a general prohibition against, tracking devices and whatnot. But when you have situations such as this, where either you have the consent of the owner of a vehicle, or the owner of the motor vehicle has reported the vehicle stolen, to me, it just makes sense if you have the opportunity as law enforcement to go ahead and take that vehicle, to be able to monitor it in the moment, to reduce the amount of chases that are happening on our city streets, to increase the safety of bystanders and pedestrians in a way that doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment in the sense that now you have a search and seizure sort of a situation. To me, it just makes sense for public policy's sake. This is a very simple bill. I think it's very limited in scope, because this is an exception from the general policy of being able to do this. To me, it makes sense in moving forward. And I think folks would look at it in the same realm of how do you expand this in a way that really jeopardizes public privacy. And I don't think you can get there very easily. I know there's been examples brought up, but the reality is I think those are pretty attenuated to what actually is happening here. So folks, this is a straightforward bill, and I think we can do some work, we can look at things, but, as Senator Bingham has said, I mean, this is a very straightforward bill, so, thank you.
Senator Bigham.
Thank you, and I know we're coming up to the hard stop of committee here, so I will just add, I agree with everything Senator Johnson said, and I would add two things. We're looking here to protect victims, and the way this bill is written does that, because they have to proactively report that it's stolen. They have to be in cooperation with law enforcement to agree that the property that they own can be tracked, because they want it back. I mean, maybe there's memorabilia in that trunk that they really want back, and they're asking for help. Here's the other part. This needs to be used to penetrate car thief rings as well. And I think once people know that this is an option out there, it may be a deterrent to kind of what Senator Johnson said, to intervene and stop the car chases, the car thieves. And it's tragic that, we're seeing children, as Senator Matthews has eloquently talked about, how that's just, I can't even imagine what that would be like. Dogs that are in cars and property, and this has to stop. And I think this is a good tool for law enforcement to do that. And I think there are protections in place, and as Senator Johnson said, there's room to fine tune the language, and we have time to do that, Mr. Chair. You're laying the bill over, so, but I think we would be remiss to not get this across the finish line this year to help law enforcement bring justice to victims and hold car thieves accountable.
Thank you. I had a question Under Sheriff Martin. Thank you for enduring our conversation. But does this device, is it capable of recording conversation?
No.
Are there any devices like that that would do that if you shot it at a car or it stuck to a car in some way?
No, I'm not familiar with any technologies that would allow that, Mr. Chair. Also, we brought this forward. We brought this legislation forward because we recognize that technology is emerging. Agencies were starting to use these technologies, and we wanted clarification and to ensure that we were doing the right thing. It's important to me to note that a person who's in a stolen vehicle does not have an expectation of privacy. Case law has backed that up time after time after time, that there's no expectation of privacy when you're in someone's vehicle that you've stolen. If you get out and run, now you have an expectation of privacy that's also outlined in the law. But this is not about Fourth Amendment issues. The owner has an expectation of privacy on their property, but the auto thief does not. And I want to clarify that because a lot of the arguments that Mr. Newmeister made are based on a legitimate owner of a vehicle. If someone breaks into your house and is inside your house, we don't have to get a search warrant to go inside your house to get that person. Because they have no expectation of privacy. And I want to make sure we're talking about what the real issues are. For us, it's we want to get these cars back, but we want to do it in a way that's as safe as possible. And there are times when the exigency applies to when there's a Fourth Amendment issue. And there's not in these cases other than with the owner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Latz.
So, Mr. Chairman, Under Sheriff, if there's no Fourth Amendment issue here, why do you need this bill at all? You could just attach the tracking device.
Because the state
Senator
statute
Sheriff
outlines, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
All right.
because the state statute outlines that law enforcement cannot place a tracking device on a vehicle without the owner's consent or a search warrant. So we're prohibited from doing it.
Well, wouldn't, Mr. Chairman, Under Sheriff, wouldn't the Constitution trump the statute in that case? Where you've got constitutional authority, no expectation of privacy, even if there's an exigent circumstance, you got a moving stolen vehicle on the road. It's kind of the very definition of an exigent circumstance, isn't it?
Under
Ye-
Sheriff.
Mr. Chair, and Senator Latz, I believe that you're correct. However, that's contrary to what our statute says. And we don't want to, that's why we want this clarification. And there are times when it would be hard to argue an exigency if a vehicle's lost. If we back off and don't chase that vehicle, then the exigency no longer exists if we're not actively pursuing that vehicle. So I understand the exigency exceptions to the search warrant requirement, but I think that the reality is, there's times when we have to back off or we lose sight of a vehicle and we slow down because it's just gotten they're driving too fast or too recklessly. They're driving the wrong way into oncoming traffic. And then once we slow down, it's gonna be hard to argue that there's an exigency. So we're trying to get clarification to use this technology, but we also wanna limit we believe that we should limit our ability to do it. I mean, we don't believe it should be an unlimited amount of time. We agree with the amendment that's been offered to limit that time because that 24 hours gives us time to contact the owners and get consent or to seek a search warrant. You know, once we're no longer actively following or pursuing a vehicle.
Sir Letts.
Mr. Chairman, Under Sheriff, is the concern that there's a criminal penalty associated with not complying with the statute?
Correct.
Under what circumstances, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Under Sheriff, then under what circumstances do you envision using this authority?
If,
Under Sheriff Martin.
Chair, and I apologize, I'm not used to this.
All right.
These rules.
I'm not used to it either.
I'm using my interrupting my kids voice, but so for us, I'll give you a good example. Last night into this morning, we had a deputy who saw a vehicle that had been reported stolen. It was a Honda CRV, 2 individuals in the vehicle. He's following the vehicle, waiting for another deputy to be able to come and deploy stop sticks. But we didn't know whether or not there was consent from the owner because it wasn't stolen within our jurisdiction. If it is, then we ask for that consent and we note that. But but it wasn't. What happened then was they ended up, that car rear-ended one of our other squads as they pulled onto the street and didn't know it was coming up behind them. A short chase ensued. That could have been prevented if that deputy could have deployed a GPS device, and then we could back off. We wouldn't have to pursue that vehicle. As it was, that vehicle in the short pursuit that ensued drove off the road, went through a planter on a boulevard, crashed into a parked vehicle. You know, we could have, with that unmarked, I don't know if he was in an unmarked car, but with the car that we had, we could have deployed a GPS device and then backed off, got into the area and waited for the vehicle to park so that we could apprehend them safely. It's those kind of situations, I think, that would allow us to most effectively use GPS technology. And we are very cognizant of the protection of the registered owners. You know, don't want to track registered owners. We don't want to track vehicles for any reason other than that they've been reported stolen.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Sir Letts.
what about the scenario that Mr. Newmeister raised where there's a parked vehicle and it's determined to have been stolen? I mean, are you envisioning using a device like that? I mean, theoretically, you could put the device on it, sit half a block away, wait for someone to come out, enter that vehicle and drive away. Then maybe you found the perpetrator in addition to the stolen vehicle. I can see an incentive for law enforcement to want to do that, for the public to want law enforcement to do that, because then you catch the thief as well as the property. But under the language that's in the bill, that would also be allowed.
Correct.
Are you envisioning that kind of use as well?
Under Sheriff Martin.
Sheriff Limmerd, I'm not envisioning that. I think in that case, there are a number of other avenues that are open to us. We can get a search warrant if it's parked and unoccupied. You know, there are a number of things that we can do. Generally, we would recover any vehicle that was parked and unoccupied. So I don't envision that. I understand what the concern is, though.
Mr. Chairman,
Sir Letts.
I guess Well, I know we're laying this bill over. I think it's a good thing that we are. I think there are a number of questions here that I'm not quite sure that I'm comfortable with in terms of what I understand the case law to be. I mean, getting a warrant, for example, to do a search is a probable cause standard. That's a whole different animal than the court order that's provided for under 626A under these circumstances. We have the issues of expectations of privacy. We have the issue of why not just call it an exigent circumstance, define it as an exigent circumstance rather than going through the language that's in here. You get into the issue then of how long does an exigent circumstance deemed under the law to exist? 24 hours, 48 hours, 5 hours? I seem to think that you probably don't have certainly no constitutional problems with just attaching this tracking device. When you've got a moving vehicle that is reported stolen, there's no expectation of privacy, so you don't even need to get into the Fourth Amendment exigent circumstance analysis at all. Maybe this statute is simply outdated now and needs to be reviewed in light of case law decisions along the way to see if the framework that's even here makes any sense anymore. So I don't know if we have time right now really to kind of dive too deeply into that stuff. I understand how a statute that creates a crime might put law enforcement in a bind, even though there are constitutional grounds for going ahead and using these kind of tracking devices, maybe but for the statute. There are circumstances beyond that this bill would allow the use of those devices without a warrant and without fourth analysis. For example, parked cars and so on, where there isn't any risk to the public, but you could still see a logical reason for wanting to track that vehicle. It'd almost be like taking a law enforcement dummy vehicle and putting it out there in areas of where vehicles are known to be stolen, except that vehicle is owned by the law enforcement agency, so you don't have any of these issues come up. But they could use a privately owned vehicle that's reported stolen for that purpose, at least theoretically. So I think it's worth a little deeper analysis before this bill gets included in any omnibus bill or broader bill for passage. I just encourage us to take some time, or staff and council, to sit down and kind of work through some of these issues.
We'll certainly have that opportunity, Senator Matz, because we're laying this bill over. Senator Johnson, followed by Ingebrigtsen, and followed by Senator Pence.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I just left my hand up.
Oh, okay. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions of the officer. When you're required to go get a warrant, you have to have probable cause.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And if you're tracking, and I come from way back when somebody would come and ask the sheriff, could you see who this is that's in my driveway? Give me the license number. And back then we would say, yeah, this is who it is. Then we got into this problem of, oh boy, it might be a boyfriend, it might be somebody that is not supposed to be there. So eventually, obviously, we could never do that any longer. That's a long time ago. What I'm saying is that if an officer were to put a tracking device on somebody for a personal reason, that would be recorded properly, I think, in the department, wouldn't it?
Under Sheriff Martin.
I may be confused with what you're asking, but if, anytime we place a tracking device, from a search warrant, subsequent to a search warrant, we would definitely be recording it.
Okay, I'm asking you if you don't have it, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm asking you if, and there might be some feeling that, a cop is going to put a tracking device on somebody's car without permission and start tracking it, that is being recorded. So he or she would have to answer for that tracking device. data.
Undersheriff Martin?
Mr. Chair, that's true.
Yeah, so there's a way to cover that if it's gonna be abused,
Correct.
yeah. I'd love to see how that deployment thing works. I've never seen that before. I watch Batman a lot and I'm thinking, wow, can't you just pull that thing right back with the cable? But, and it's the idea that just because you can, you shouldn't do it. You know, that was a statement I made earlier. The point of that is that, if you do this illegally, you're gonna be monitored and there's gonna be consequences for the officer. And when you talk about technology, when you talk about the 24-hour leeway there, and you're okay with that, is that enough time?
Undersecretary, Undersheriff.
Mr. Chair and Senator Ingebrigtsen, I realize undersheriff's a weird
Yeah.
title, so. no,
It's St. Paul, we
Even-
understand.
I don't know what it is. I'm sorry, I lost track, but,
It's 24 hours enough.
24 hours is plenty of time, because by that time, we're not gonna follow someone for 24 hours. And we're not gonna try to chase them for 24 hours. By that time, we can apply for a search warrant, get a search warrant, and really that, goes, the need for the immediate action goes away. So 24 hours is very reasonable, time frame for us. And if something's gonna go on longer than that, we should have a search warrant, because we should be going to a judge and asking, hey, can we continue to do this?
Certainly. So I'll just finish, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I didn't get promoted to sheriff today like somebody else. So just, Senator Latz, I appreciate the comments and I know the Constitution has to be protected here. And we also know that we're up against an epidemic of street crime that's going on here that we have to do what we possibly can within the boundaries, of course, the Constitution, to give officers the tools to be able to try and put a stop to this. You know, everybody says that, you know, they're running and we're gonna back off. That was something we just never did years ago, whether I was smart or not. But I'm from rural Minnesota where we didn't have, you know, the opportunity for a whole lot of damage to anybody else, but you never know what they're running from. You don't know what's in the trunk of that car. You know, let's not forget that. You don't know what's in the trunk of that car and why they're running. It might just be a stolen car, that might be, but maybe there's something in there. Maybe something in there that they don't want anybody else to know about. And the technology piece, folks, the bad guys aren't coming here and asking permission to use their technology. I mean, they really aren't. And so that's what law enforcement seems to be up against. And but again, we have to move forward with keeping the Constitution in mind, and I understand that. But let's allow this to happen, and again, with justification for officers that abuse. If they abuse it, it's there, and move forward with it. So thank you for here. Thank you, Senator Johnson, Senator Bigham, for bringing it forward.
Senator Limmer, or Chair
Senator Bigham.
Limmer, just to add one thing to Senator Ingebrigtsen's tracking of, no pun intended, what he's saying. You have three options. The amendment was adopted. You have three options. You can remove the device, disable the device, or obtain a search warrant. So if, just like the undersheriff said, if things aren't working out, they're not going to continue to track someone for 24 hours, then they would, have to disable or remove the device. So there are options there rather than just getting the warrant if things aren't panning out. And then to Senator Ingebrigtsen's point that if it's abused, there's consequences for it.
Thank you. Senator Pappas, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're going over time, so I think my question is pretty simple for Mr. Martin. What if you have a circumstance where you have joint ownership of the car and someone is fleeing a domestic violence situation? Is this just not applicable? You'd use, what would you do then? Because it's not a stolen vehicle if there's joint ownership, right?
Under Sheriff Martin.
Mr. Chair and Senator Pappas, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because we oftentimes get people who want to report a vehicle stolen, and it's really a breach of trust. It's a civil thing. It's a ex-wife, ex-husband, estranged spouse, and that's something that we vet out when we take the original report. So that's something that I think we already avoid in a lot of respects. But we would never want to track someone in that situation if someone has a legal reason to do it. A lot of times a parent will report their car stolen when in reality they know their kid took it and they don't want their kid out in the vehicle, or the kid doesn't have a driver's license again. That's a breach of trust. It doesn't meet the standard for a stolen vehicle, so it wouldn't apply.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, just one other thing to factor in here. This, this bill is aimed at dealing with stolen vehicles, but the same question could arise if someone simply tries to flee a peace officer when they're being stopped for speeding. Same issue regarding chases. That's a felony offense for sure. Fleeing a peace officer, and why wouldn't we want to use the same technology? Is the current statute the right framework to address those situations as well? That's another question that we should address.
Senator Latz, you may be correct on line 1.9. Makes reference to a condition that this would be applied on a stolen motor vehicle. It doesn't apply, at least for the purposes of this possible statute, to any other circumstance.
Mr. Chairman, I agree.
Yeah.
But the same principle that this bill is being brought forward to address would equally apply to
Right.
other circumstances that might also be worth addressing.
Exactly right. I was agreeing with you.
Yeah.
All right. Senate File 3329 will be laid over, and there is no further business before this committee. We stand adjourned. Thank you.